Imagine the person who wakes up beside you every morning, who makes you a warm breakfast, is secretly harboring a horrifying plan. What if every beautiful expression of affection was just a mask for a single goal: money? It's a shocking story. This is the tale of a wife who, driven not by resentment or a broken heart but by pure greed, plotted to murder her own husband to collect a life insurance policy worth over $10 million. The method she chose was so clever and meticulous that it stunned everyone. How could she commit such an act against the person she should have loved most in the world? Let's uncover how this dark story unfolded, step by step. On the morning of July 12, 2023, New York City was just entering a stormy season. The gray sky hung low, and raindrops fell slowly onto the slick asphalt. The mixed scent of damp earth and grass from the overnight rain pricked the nose. The morning in the Upper East Side, one of NYC's most affluent neighborhoods, seemed to be flowing as usual. Luxury foreign cars moved in and out of the residential complex gates, a security guard stood watch with a sleepy face, and mothers were getting ready to take their children to school. No one could have predicted that this day would be the beginning of a shocking tragedy. In a grand mansion surrounded by a tall, black iron fence, Deputy Chief James Miller, a high-ranking police official long respected for his integrity and principle-driven nature, was found dead in his own bedroom. The news spread in an instant. Everyone was shocked by the sudden death of a key figure who had dedicated decades to public service. An ambulance raced through the streets of the Upper East Side, its siren wailing, its red and blue lights reflecting chaotically on the wet road surfaces. Neighbors who heard the news began to gather in front of the deputy chief's gate. Whispers could be heard. "I heard it was a heart attack for the deputy chief." "No way, he had a health checkup last month and was perfectly fine." The usually quiet neighborhood was now filled with curiosity and anxiety. Inside the house, in the living room, the deceased deputy chief's wife, Jessica Miller, sat with a pale face. Her long hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red as if she had been crying, but strangely, no tears were flowing. Her hands tightly gripped a white handkerchief, damp with cold sweat. Jessica spoke softly to the paramedics. "My husband didn't wake up this morning. I just thought he was tired." Her voice was cracked and broken, but to some who watched the scene, it didn't sound like the natural emotional expression of a grieving wife, but rather like a pre-rehearsed line. An even more shocking fact was that just the day before his death, Deputy Chief Miller had signed a life insurance policy worth over $10 million. And the sole beneficiary of that policy was none other than his wife, Jessica. To some, it seemed like too perfect a coincidence. The police arrived at the scene. The bedroom where they found Deputy Chief Miller was impeccably clean. There were no signs of a struggle or a break-in. On the bedside table sat a half-finished glass of Merlot and a now-cold cup of warm ginger tea. These two ordinary items would later become crucial pieces of evidence in the long investigation of this case. Meanwhile, outside the house, the rain was still drizzling. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, stood under an umbrella and whispered to the person next to her. "Last night, I saw a man in a green raincoat going through the side gate of that house. I thought he was a relative, but the time was so strange. It was almost 2 in the morning. At that moment, her words might have seemed trivial, but they would later become one of the important puzzle pieces that would lift the veil of truth." That damp morning witnessed the prelude to a dark story. The mysterious death of a respected police official, a beautiful but enigmatic young wife, and a massive life insurance claim that became the talk of New York City. No one knew that behind the walls of the grand mansion on the Upper East Side, a wicked plan had been meticulously woven. As dawn broke in New York, the affluence of the Upper East Side was quiet, with only the chirping of rain-soaked birds in the trees. But that tranquil morning was shattered when an ambulance and police cars stopped in front of the luxurious mansion's gate. Veteran Detective Mark Sullivan stepped out of his car with a serious expression. His sharp eyes scanned the surroundings of the yard. The smell of wet earth mixed with the scent of antiseptic from the medical team made the atmosphere even heavier. As soon as he entered the master bedroom, he felt a sense of unease. The room was too tidy for a home that had just lost its master. The curtains were only half drawn, and a table lamp was still on. On the bedside table, there was a cup of already cold herbal tea and a half-empty glass of red wine. On the bed, Deputy Chief Miller's body lay stiff. His lips had turned blue, and his eyes were half open, as if holding on to a secret he couldn't tell. A medical examiner whispered quietly to Detective Sullivan. "Sir, rigor mortis is significant. The time of death is estimated to be in the early morning." Detective Sullivan nodded and turned his head toward the wife, Jessica, who was sitting on the sofa with a pale face. She was clutching a handkerchief, but no more tears were flowing. She explained the situation in a calm voice. "I woke up in the morning and thought my husband was still sleeping. I tried to wake him up, but he didn't move, so I was so shocked I called for an ambulance." Detective Sullivan focused on her every word. Jessica's explanation was so logical and fluent that it sounded as if it had been memorized. After taking meticulous notes, he looked straight into Jessica's eyes. There was an inexplicable coldness in them. Meanwhile, outside the room, the whispers of the residents could be heard. A neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Gable, spoke to a police officer with a worried face. "Was it around 2 a.m. last night? I saw a tall man in a black jacket going through the side gate of that house. It was raining so hard, I thought it was a gardener or a worker, but thinking about it now, it's strange." That testimony was immediately relayed to Detective Sullivan. He quickly checked the security records of the complex, but the CCTV camera at the guardhouse had only recorded a blurry image. The lens was foggy from the downpour, making the person's face unclear. Then Mrs. Gable's testimony becomes very important. Detective Sullivan muttered and returned to the bedroom. His gaze was fixed on the still half-full wine bottle. He instructed the forensics team to collect samples from the glass and the bottle. The same went for the remaining herbal tea. The agents documented all the evidence, and Jessica just sat quietly. Sometimes she lowered her head, sometimes she stared blankly out the window, but there were no sobs or looks of shock. Everything was excessively calm. Detective Sullivan approached her and asked in a gentle tone, "Ma'am, did you have any guests last night, or was there anything unusual?" Jessica slowly shook her head and answered briefly, "No. There was no one. It was just like any other day. We had dinner, drank some tea, and then went to bed." That answer heightened Detective Sullivan's suspicion. Her husband was found dead a few hours later, yet everything was supposed to be as usual. Moreover, a neighbor testified that a strange man had entered the house. Detective Sullivan looked around the room, observing the small details. The overly arranged pillows, the curtains that would normally be fully closed for sleeping being half open, and the still brightly lit table lamp, it all looked like a well-staged scene. Outside, some reporters had begun to arrive. They took pictures from a distance, trying to capture the moment of the luxurious mansion filled with police officers. The residents' whispers grew louder, some in bewilderment, some in horror. Detective Sullivan muttered to himself, "Something is hidden in this house, and I have to find it before it's all too late." As evening began to fall on New York, the gray sky seemed to add to the heavy atmosphere hanging over the deputy chief's family mansion. The flashing lights of the police cars still rotating in front of the main gate reflected red and blue light on the wet road, creating dancing shadows on the puddles. Detective Mark Sullivan, deep in thought, opened his notebook. Since morning, he had recorded every detail, from Jessica's expression and the witness's statement to the evidence found. But the more he wrote, the clearer it became that the deputy chief's death was not ordinary. The medical examiner approached with a file containing the initial examination results. "Detective," he said quietly, "there are no signs of a heart attack. Instead, traces of a chemical were found in the victim's system. A substance similar to a large dose of sleeping pills. When mixed with alcohol, it can cause respiratory failure within hours, depending on the victim's physical condition. Detective Sullivan let out a deep sigh. The explanation matched the reality. The deputy chief was found in the morning, but it was highly likely he had been dead since the early hours. From which beverage was it detected? Detective Sullivan asked. Trace amounts of the substance were detected in both the red wine and the herbal tea. The eyes of everyone in the room turned to the bedside table where the wine glass and teacup had been placed. The evidence was immediately sealed in transparent plastic bags and affixed with official labels. Jessica, who had been keeping her head down on the sofa, finally spoke up. My husband had trouble sleeping. I always made him herbal tea. The red wine was also a small habit of his before bed. Her voice sounded natural, but Detective Sullivan caught something different. Before speaking, Jessica swallowed, and she gripped her handkerchief so tightly that her fingertips turned white. It was a sign of anxiety that revealed itself even as her face tried to maintain composure. Mrs. Miller, Detective Sullivan said, where did you purchase this herbal tea? At an herbal shop near the market. I've been using it for a long time, she answered quickly. Detective Sullivan noted it down and instructed his subordinate to investigate the shop. A few minutes later, a police officer came in holding a small plastic bag. Detective, I found this in a kitchen drawer. Inside was a white pill in an unlabeled bottle. The smell of chemicals hit the nose. Detective Sullivan held up the bottle and looked at Jessica. Do you know what this is? For a moment, Jessica's eyes widened, but she soon shook her head. I don't know. It's probably my husband's medication. He sometimes kept his own medicine. The answer sounded rushed. Detective Sullivan noted that in his head. Leaving the bedroom, he headed to the deputy chief's study. The large wooden desk was covered in documents, but what stood out the most was a blue file. Detective Sullivan opened it. It was a copy of a $10 million life insurance policy, signed just 3 weeks ago. The name of the sole beneficiary was Jessica Miller. This is no coincidence, Detective Sullivan muttered. The motive was becoming clearer. He called 2 of his subordinates. Immediately check this family's bank accounts. Look for any suspicious transactions in the last 3 months. Just then, Detective Sullivan's cell phone rang. It was the complex manager. Detective, I've rechecked last night's CCTV footage. The screen is blurry because of the rain, but a tall man was captured entering through the side gate at 1:57 a.m. His identity can't be confirmed, but it's definitely not the deputy chief. Detective Sullivan nodded. The resident's testimony from the morning had been faintly confirmed. He returned to the living room and looked at Jessica. Ma'am, there's footage of someone entering your house in the early morning. Didn't you hear anything? Jessica was silent for a moment. Her eyes quickly darted toward the window and then back down. I was sound asleep, so I didn't know anyone came in. Her voice sounded weak and was not as firm as before. Outside the house, reporters and residents continued to gather. The sound of camera shutters and whispers full of questions flowed in through the half-open door. Is it really a murder case? Is the wife involved? The voices felt like pressure that further aggravated Jessica's anxiety. Detective Sullivan closed his notebook. He walked toward the door and looked outside. The rain had stopped, but the smell of wet earth was mixed with a tension that was not yet over. He said to himself, the pieces are coming together one by one. Poison, a newly signed insurance policy, a strange figure, and a wife full of secrets. But I need that one crucial piece of evidence to tie it all together. I won't stop until the truth is revealed. The night at the NYPD precinct was thick with tension. Detective Sullivan sat in the interrogation room, staring intently at the bank transaction report that had just arrived. There was a record of a large sum of money flowing from Jessica's account to a man named Kevin Reed. He was a former security guard at the upscale residential complex where the victim lived. The amount reached $50,000, a sum impossible to explain as simple help. The next morning, Detective Sullivan, along with 2 team members, visited an ordinary apartment in Queens. A tall, well-built man in his early 30s, Kevin Reed looked startled when his name was called. When the door opened, his hands trembled, and his gaze tried to avoid the police officer's eyes. He was taken to the police station without much resistance. In the interrogation room, Kevin Reed sat with a pale face. Detective Sullivan didn't press him right away. He simply showed him the transfer statement. "This amount is enough to buy a small house. How can you call this a simple loan or help?" Kevin Reed was silent for a long time before finally speaking in a trembling voice. "Mrs. Miller asked for help a few times. She just said it was for personal matters." He refused to elaborate further, but the cold sweat on his forehead betrayed his fear. In the afternoon, Jessica was summoned again for further questioning. This time, her face looked more tired, but she still tried to maintain her composure. When Detective Sullivan asked why she sent a large sum of money to Kevin Reed, she fluently replied that it was just helping an old friend. Detective Sullivan listened quietly, then emphasized that such an amount was not trivial and couldn't be due to simple compassion. Jessica sighed, lowered her head for a moment, and then said, "I didn't want to make a private matter a big deal." Detective Sullivan's gaze was sharp. He felt that the answer was too neat, like a prepared script. But he refrained from accusing her directly. Inwardly, he noted that all of Jessica's actions seemed staged to protect her image. The online news had started to mention the case, and the pressure of public opinion was being felt. This made the investigation even more cautious. That night, after all the questioning was over, Detective Sullivan sat alone in his office. The dim light illuminated the scattered notes and records on his desk. The name Kevin Reed was now clearly linked to Jessica, not just through the money transfer but also through the upscale complex where they were once together. The blurry CCTV, the suspicious transaction, Jessica's overly calm demeanor, it all started to form a pattern. Detective Sullivan knew this was just the beginning and that there was another layer of secrets left to uncover. He closed the case file, took a deep breath, and looked out at the dark New York night. He silently vowed, "I will not stop until every piece of the truth fits together." The morning in New York felt different. The light rain that fell overnight still left the scent of wet earth, and the roads around the police precinct began to get busy again. In the interrogation room, Detective Sullivan stared at a computer screen replaying the CCTV footage secured from Deputy Chief Miller's house. After zooming in on a few frames, the shadow of a tall, well-built man could be seen crossing the backyard around 2 a.m. The movement was fast, and the face was not clear, but Detective Sullivan was convinced it was Kevin Reed. A moment later, another video captured Jessica coming out of the bedroom, holding a small box. She paused for a moment in the living room, placed it on a table, and then walked away with a firm expression. Detective Sullivan stopped the video at that point. That small box could be the key to the whole mystery. That afternoon, the forensics team returned to the deputy chief's house for further investigation. After a thorough search of the kitchen, they found a nearly empty bottle of sleeping pills in a cabinet. The bottle had an official prescription label issued by a pharmacy in Manhattan. The prescription number was immediately recorded, and the doctor who wrote it was scheduled to be summoned. Meanwhile, on the deputy chief's desk, a notebook was tucked away. On the last few pages, short but heavy sentences were written. "If I hadn't signed that insurance policy, what would she have done?" Detective Sullivan read the sentence repeatedly, feeling a chill run down his spine. The note clearly showed that the victim had been suspicious of his wife. But he knew that motive alone was not enough. He needed a chain of evidence linking the sleeping pills, the CCTV footage, the flow of funds, and the role of a third party. As evening approached, Jessica was summoned again. Her face looked tired, but she still tried to maintain her appearance. When Detective Sullivan asked about the bottle of sleeping pills, she quickly replied, "That's my husband's. He always had trouble sleeping." Detective Sullivan just nodded and then took out a copy of the deputy chief's note. For a moment, Jessica's face turned pale, but she quickly tried to regain her composure. "My husband must have misunderstood. He was a person who got stressed easily," she said softly. The answer was so neat that it sounded as if it had been prepared in advance. Detective Sullivan watched her quietly, noting her every body language cue, the forced smile, the hesitation before answering, the slightly trembling tone of her voice. All these were signs that she was hiding something. That night, after the interrogation ended, Detective Sullivan returned to his office again. Faint smoke rose from a cigarette he hadn't smoked in a long time. He thought about the scattered puzzle pieces, the suspiciously calm Jessica, Kevin Reed who received the questionable money, the deputy chief's note full of warnings, and the CCTV footage suggesting the presence of a stranger. Everything was connected, but something was still missing. A confession. Outside, it started to rain again. The street lights reflected yellow on the wet asphalt. Detective Sullivan realized that the real storm had not yet begun, and that this case had just opened its first layer. He closed the evidence file, took a deep breath, and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, I have to press Kevin Reed harder. He definitely knows more than he's already said." The next morning, the interrogation room was once again filled with tension. Kevin Reed sat on the steel chair. His body looked stiff, as if drained of energy. He stared blankly at the floor, his lips occasionally moving but making no sound. Last night, he had been moved to a temporary holding cell, and now his face looked like that of a man who had given up on everything. Detective Sullivan slowly entered and placed a stack of documents on the table. Without rushing, he threw out a firm statement. "Kevin, you were at the deputy chief's house that night. The evidence already speaks for itself." Kevin remained silent, trying to hold his breath. Detective Sullivan played the CCTV footage showing the tall man entering the backyard. The screen was blurry, but it was clear enough. Kevin didn't deny it, he just closed his eyes for a moment as if resigned. Detective Sullivan leaned forward. "You weren't alone, were you? If you keep quiet, you'll take the fall for everything. Tell me who ordered you." The room was so quiet that only the ticking of the clock could be heard. Finally, Kevin whispered, "She just asked me to help. She said no one would get hurt. I didn't know it would end like this." Detective Sullivan pressed him in a firm tone. "Who ordered you?" Kevin covered his face with both hands and uttered the name that had been expected from the beginning. "Jessica." That confession changed the atmosphere in the room. Suppressing his emotions, Detective Sullivan continued with sharp questions. Kevin confessed that Jessica had called him to the deputy chief's house in the early morning and gave him a small box containing sleeping pills. His mission was simple but brutal: to ensure the deputy chief drank the beverage mixed with the drug. He hesitated at first, but Jessica promised him a large reward and a better life. "Why did you get involved?" Detective Sullivan asked, looking him straight in the eye. Kevin lowered his head. His voice was almost cracking. "We were close a few years ago. She knew my weaknesses. I was trapped, Detective." That statement confirmed to Detective Sullivan that Jessica had used an emotional aspect to control Kevin. After the interrogation, Detective Sullivan returned to his office. He felt that one knot had been untied, but a wider net was still waiting. The fact that Jessica was the main perpetrator was becoming clearer, but the pattern of this case was too meticulous and organized to be seen as a simple crime by a wife. That evening, an additional report arrived from the financial team. Besides the $50,000 transferred to Kevin Reed, A much larger sum was found to have flowed into the account of a man named Ryan Vance. He was a former employee of an insurance company in New York. The amount was shockingly large, tens of times what Kevin had received. Detective Sullivan closed the file firmly. This time, he was convinced that Jessica was just the starting point, that there was a larger organization behind this, and that Ryan Vance might be a crucial part of it. As the New York sky sank into an orange glow, Detective Sullivan stood looking out the window. He whispered to himself, "This fight has only just begun." That night, the NYPD precinct was still bustling, even though it was past 11 p.m. The fluorescent lights in the hallway cast a pale white glow, illuminating the tired faces of the investigators. But Detective Sullivan remained in his office. In front of him lay a document with the results of a new trace. Ryan Vance, a man in his late 30s, was a former insurance company employee who had been fired for manipulating policy data in the past. The report clearly showed that he had received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Jessica's account just days before Deputy Chief Miller's death. Detective Sullivan called two of his subordinates. "Investigate all of Ryan Vance's activities. Uncover everything, his accounts, call records, and the people he met last week." The next morning, the team moved quickly. The trace revealed that Ryan Vance was not really unemployed after his dismissal. He had built a dark network, manipulating insurance claims, forging documents, and even supplying certain drugs from outside sources. He seemed to live a quiet life, but his lifestyle was at a level unimaginable for a former employee. In the afternoon, a stakeout was set up at a luxury condo in Midtown. A sports car that contrasted with his status was parked in the garage. When they knocked hard on the door, Ryan Vance tried to escape through the balcony, but the police force had already surrounded the building. He was eventually taken to the police station with his wrists in handcuffs. His face was sweating, but he still tried to maintain his composure. The atmosphere in the interrogation room was different than usual. While Kevin Reed had shown weakness, Ryan Vance sat with his back straight. His gaze was sharp, and a faint smile played on his lips. "I'm just a consultant. When people come to me, I help them with their paperwork and get paid." "What's the problem?" he said casually. Detective Sullivan looked at him coldly. "You received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Jessica. What's the reason for getting so much money?" Ryan Vance chuckled and leaned back in his chair. "If I were to explain, I probably wouldn't get out of this room safely. Trust me, Detective. What you're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. There are bigger people behind me." The words silenced the room. Detective Sullivan refrained from pressing further. He realized that Ryan Vance was different from Kevin Reed. This man was not a scared pawn but a professional used to covering his tracks. He would not break easily under direct questioning. As the night deepened, Detective Sullivan's mind became sharper. He knew he had to broaden the scope of the investigation. Jessica was not just a cunning wife after property but part of a plan involving experienced people and financial manipulation. Ryan Vance was just one knot, not the final one. Detective Sullivan stood by the window, looking at the hazy New York sky. He muttered to himself, "This game is much deeper than I thought. And the next step will be even more dangerous." That afternoon, the interrogation room was once again filled with tension. Jessica sat with her arms crossed. Her face was still calm, as if she were completely unaffected. But behind that calmness, Detective Sullivan could feel that she was hiding something. "Mrs. Miller." Detective Sullivan's voice was low but firm. "We have investigated your bank accounts. There was a suspicious transfer to an account linked to Ryan Vance. The amount is not small. How do you explain it?" Jessica smiled faintly, as if she had the answer ready. "I was just helping an acquaintance who was in difficulty." "Isn't it natural for a wife to take care of the people around her?" Detective Sullivan did not respond immediately. He opened a brown file folder and took out a copy of the insurance policy. The problem is that this transfer was made just days after your husband's insurance policy was approved. And that insurance policy is worth tens of millions of dollars. Doesn't that seem too much of a coincidence? This time, Jessica was silent for a moment. She didn't look at the document directly but lowered her head for a moment. Is it wrong for a wife to want to secure her children's future? The insurance was a family decision. Don't make it seem like I planned something. Detective Sullivan leaned forward. His gaze was sharp. Then, can you explain this phone recording? He gave a signal, and a technician played an audio file. Jessica's voice was heard, low but clear. Make sure everything goes smoothly so he doesn't suspect. After that, we'll be free too. Jessica's face hardened, but she tried to suppress her expression. That's not my voice. Anyone can manipulate a recording. Of course. Detective Sullivan replied briefly. But this recording was found on Kevin Reed's phone along with the transfer evidence. Do you want to claim that Kevin Reed manipulated your voice? For a moment, Jessica looked straight at Detective Sullivan. It was a calculating look. She took a deep breath. Kevin is a pawn. He's someone who can make up any story to save himself. Detective Sullivan let the silence hang. He knew that this kind of psychological pressure could be more effective than 1,000 questions. Behind the one-way glass, several team members were watching, waiting for Jessica to show signs of breaking. After a few minutes, Detective Sullivan continued in a soft tone, almost like a friend. Ma'am, I don't think you're a cruel person. But this game has gone too far. If you keep denying it, you'll have to bear everything alone. Kevin Reed and Ryan Vance have already started to talk, and they've mentioned your name several times. Don't let them turn everything around and frame you as the main culprit. Jessica sighed and leaned back in her chair. She closed her eyes for a few seconds and then opened them again. Detective, she said quietly, you're very good at twisting words. But I'm not a fool either. Everything you've said is just fragmented pieces. There's no direct evidence that I put the poison in, is there? Detective Sullivan nodded slightly, acknowledging his opponent's strength. That's right. There's no direct evidence yet. But there's too much circumstantial evidence. The transfer records, the insurance policy, the recording, the testimonies of Kevin Reed and Ryan Vance, one by one, they're all pointing at you. And I'm confident that the final piece of evidence will appear soon. Just then, a team member from outside the room rushed in with a new report. He handed the paper to Detective Sullivan. Detective Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he read it. Interesting, he muttered. He looked at Jessica again. We just secured a statement from an insurance company employee. She clearly remembers that you came alone without your husband to process the insurance, and even requested to rush the procedure. Is this also a coincidence? For the first time, Jessica lost her composure. She bit her lower lip and repeatedly tapped the table with her fingers. I just wanted to protect my husband. He said he was feeling very tired lately, so what's wrong with preparing for the worst? Detective Sullivan leaned back and said quietly, if your intentions were pure, there's nothing wrong. But if that insurance was part of a grand plan to erase someone from your life for money, then it's a crime. And what's sadder is that it's a betrayal of your family. The words hit like a knife. Jessica's face hardened, and her eyes flashed as if she were holding something back. But she soon straightened her back and tried to regain control. You can say whatever you want, Detective. But remember, I'm not alone in this story. If I go down, many names will be dragged down with me. At those words, Detective Sullivan held his breath. He knew that Jessica had just thrown a significant clue, that there was a bigger force behind this, beyond Kevin Reed and Ryan Vance. The interrogation was paused, and Jessica was taken back to the holding cell. Detective Sullivan sat alone in his office. That night, The dim fluorescent light cast a shadow on his tired face, but his thoughts kept swirling. Jessica's last words? "I'm not alone," echoed in his mind. Was there a wider network he hadn't touched yet? Or was it the last bluff of a cornered wife? Detective Sullivan knew the answer would change the direction of the investigation. On his desk, he stared at a large board filled with post-it notes. Names, dates, fund flows, pieces of evidence. Red lines connected one point to another, creating a complex pattern like a spider's web. In the center, Jessica's name was written in large letters, but now a large question mark appeared next to it. Detective Sullivan closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The night in New York was deepening, and the sound of motorcycles on the street was fading. But for Detective Sullivan, this case had just opened a new, more dangerous chapter. He realized that the truth was often more complicated than black and white. That morning, the NYPD precinct was busy again. In his office, Detective Sullivan looked at the ever-thickening pile of documents. Last night's words from Jessica, "I'm not alone in this story," were still vividly etched in his mind. His gaze turned to the investigation board on the wall. He wasn't just looking, he was adding new notes, connecting lines, creating a pattern that was now even more complex. Jessica's name was in the center, but Detective Sullivan intentionally added a large question mark next to it. Clearly, there was a more dangerous figure behind the scenes. A team member rushed in with a USB drive. "Detective, there's a significant discovery on Ryan Vance's laptop. You have to see this." They immediately headed to the digital forensics lab. On the large screen, several encrypted documents that had just been decrypted were displayed. A technician explained, "We found a list of large insurance policies. The pattern is the same: the policyholder dies suddenly, and the beneficiary is always the closest person. But the interesting part is that almost every policy was processed by the same agent." The name Arthur Finch appeared clearly. Detective Sullivan narrowed his eyes. He knew that name. He was a former branch manager of a famous insurance company who had suddenly resigned a few years ago. Since then, Arthur Finch was known to have disappeared from the industry, and now his name had resurfaced at the heart of this network. "Is there a direct link between Finch and Jessica?" Detective Sullivan asked. The technician nodded. "There's an email Jessica sent to Finch's address 2 weeks before her husband died. The subject was urgent insurance, immediate activation needed. Detective Sullivan took a deep breath. The puzzle pieces were becoming clearer. Jessica was clearly involved, but there was a more experienced mastermind pulling the strings. That afternoon, Detective Sullivan decided to look for information at Finch's old office. The building was old, but a few senior employees still remained. One of them, a department head named Mr. Park, was willing to talk. "Finch was a smart man," Mr. Park said, shaking his head. "He knew the loopholes in the insurance system better than anyone. But after he left the company, I heard rumors that he was hanging out with some of the newly rich in New York. They called it investment. I'm not sure if it's true, but..." That information gave Detective Sullivan the conviction that this was no longer a personal case but a syndicate that knew exactly how to turn death into profit. As night fell, Detective Sullivan returned to his office. He reopened the deceased deputy chief's journal. A short sentence on the last page sent a shiver down his spine. "If I fall, don't trust that sweet face. There is a darker shadow behind her." The words seemed to confirm Detective Sullivan's gut feeling, that the threat to the deputy chief came not only from Jessica but from a larger force. Just then, Detective Sullivan's cell phone rang suddenly. An unknown number appeared on the screen. He cautiously answered the call. "Detective Sullivan." The voice on the other end was a whisper. "I'm a former employee of Arthur Finch. I know something important, but I can't say it over the phone. If you want to know who is really pulling the strings, meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. At a cafe near the Javits Center. Please don't bring anyone. My life is in danger too. Before Detective Sullivan could ask, the call was disconnected. He stared at his phone for a while, feeling a cold chill run down his spine. He looked at the investigation board again. The red lines that had previously seemed chaotic now seemed to be pointing to one new name, Arthur Finch. But the large question mark next to it remained unresolved. Detective Sullivan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. Outside, a light rain began to wet the streets of New York, reflecting the sparkling city lights. He whispered softly to himself, "Tomorrow, everything might change." That morning, the New York sky was gray. The road to the Javits Center was busy, but Detective Sullivan didn't lose focus. He couldn't sleep because of the message from the mysterious man last night. He decided to go alone to maintain secrecy. At 9:55 a.m., he entered a small cafe next to the Javits Center. The cafe was modest, and the mixed scent of coffee and baking bread greeted him. Detective Sullivan sat in a corner with his back to the wall so he could observe the room. A moment later, a middle-aged man in a worn-out jacket came in. His steps were hurried, and his eyes anxiously darted left and right. He approached and sat down in front of Detective Sullivan. "I'm Leo Evans." His voice was low. "I used to work as an administrative staff under Arthur Finch. I know a lot, but I was scared." Detective Sullivan slowly nodded. "Tell me what you know." "Don't worry, I'll protect you as long as I'm here." Leo Evans took a deep breath and began to speak. "Finch is not just a former branch manager. He organized a network. They used their insurance knowledge to plan deaths that look like natural causes. Then the insurance money is divided fairly. Jessica is just one of many clients, and Deputy Chief Miller is just part of a pattern that has been going on for years." Detective Sullivan listened seriously. Leo's words confirmed that this case was much bigger than initially thought. "Do you have proof?" With a trembling hand, Leo took a USB drive from his jacket pocket. "This is a copy of an old file I secretly took. It contains a list of suspicious insurance policies, transaction records, and the names of the beneficiaries. Some of them will definitely surprise you." Detective Sullivan immediately put it in his briefcase. "Why are you telling me this now?" Leo lowered his head. "I was silent before because I was scared. But when I heard that Deputy Chief Miller had died, I realized they had crossed a line." Before they could continue their conversation, Leo suddenly looked toward the window. His face was tense. "Detective, I think someone is watching us." Detective Sullivan also glanced over. A black sedan with no license plate was parked across the street. The windshield was dark, but the silhouettes of two people inside were faintly visible. One of them was on the phone. Detective Sullivan made an immediate decision. "Follow me. Don't look back." He led Leo out the back door of the cafe. They passed through a narrow alley and headed to a parking lot. The damp air and the smell of garbage hit their noses, but their steps quickened. Just as they reached Detective Sullivan's car, they heard the sound of tires screeching at the end of the alley. The same black sedan was slowly entering. The front headlights turned on brightly, shining on them. "Get in, quick!" Detective Sullivan pushed Leo into the passenger seat and sat in the driver's seat. He started the engine and drove as fast as he could to get out of the alley. The black sedan followed in pursuit. During the chase, a motorcycle almost hit them, and Detective Sullivan's car swerved. Leo's body hit the door, and he flinched. He groaned in pain but was still conscious. "Detective, protect the USB. It's more important than my life." Detective Sullivan glanced at him, and then focused back on the road. With his skilled driving, he managed to cross the busy lanes and get onto a major road. The black sedan lost them in the congested New York traffic. A few minutes later, Detective Sullivan stopped the car in front of a private hospital. He looked to the side and saw Leo still pale, clutching his stomach. There was no gunshot wound, but he was in pain from the severe impact. Mr. Evans, hang in there. You have to survive to be a witness, Detective Sullivan said as he called for medical staff. Leo nodded weakly. I'll try. But if anything happens, use that data to bring down Finch. Detective Sullivan grabbed his shoulder. I promise. As the medical staff took Leo inside, Detective Sullivan stood in front of the hospital with a tense face. The USB in his pocket felt heavy, as if it contained not just data but a dark truth that could upend many lives. In the distance, he saw the black sedan speed past and disappear around a corner. The threat was not over. With a determined jaw, Detective Sullivan whispered to himself. They thought they could scare us. But now the game has changed. This time, it's our turn to hunt them. The private hospital in the heart of New York was bustling that morning. The hallways were filled with the footsteps of doctors and nurses, and the smell of antiseptic pricked the nose. In one room, Leo Evans lay with an M4 in his hand. His face was pale, but his eyes were still open. Detective Sullivan stood by the bed with his arms crossed. It's safe here now. The police are guarding outside, so no one can enter without permission. Leo was clearly in pain but managed a faint smile. I'm not afraid of dying, Detective. I'm just afraid that all of this won't be revealed. Detective Sullivan lowered his head for a moment, and then took the USB from his suit pocket. Rest assured. I've already copied this data to the precinct's server. Even if something happens to you, your secrets will be safe. Leo closed his eyes for a moment and then whispered. Inside there are Finch's records. He didn't just deal with Jessica. There are dozens of other cases. All the victims died suddenly, and the money flowed into a network of wealthy people close to Finch. They're not just scammers, they're predators. The words sent a chill down Detective Sullivan's spine. He knew he was facing not just a murder case, but an organized syndicate that turned death into a commodity. That afternoon, in the digital forensics lab, Detective Sullivan and his team began to analyze the contents of the USB. Hundreds of files were opened one by one. Insurance policies, lists of names, transaction records. The screen clearly showed a repeating pattern. A head of a family would die suddenly, the insurance would be paid out, and then the money would go into accounts connected to Arthur Finch. But the most shocking discovery was a folder named East Side Project. Inside was a document dated just a few weeks ago, with Deputy Chief Miller's name explicitly listed as a target. There was even an additional note. Execute as planned, beneficiary Jessica Miller. Detective Sullivan clenched his fist. This evidence was too blatant to ignore. Finch was not just involved, he was the key mastermind who orchestrated everything. Suddenly, a technician pointed at the screen. Detective. There's an email sent from Finch's account. It contains threats to several employees who refused to cooperate. One of them was sent to Mr. Evans. Detective Sullivan nodded with a mix of anger and pity. No wonder he was so scared. Finch knew exactly who could leak his secrets. As night fell, Detective Sullivan returned to the hospital. Leo was still lying down, but his condition had improved slightly. He slowly turned his head as Detective Sullivan entered. Detective, is that data enough? He asked in a weak voice. More than enough, Detective Sullivan replied. With this, we can prosecute Jessica and at the same time, pave the way to get to Finch. Faint tears welled up in Leo's eyes. Then I can rest easy now. But before Detective Sullivan could reassure him, there was a loud knock on the hospital room door. A nurse came in with a panicked face. Detective, some strangers are trying to enter the hospital. They claim to be the patient's family, but they don't have IDs. Detective Sullivan immediately went on alert. He turned to the two police guards. Strengthen security. Don't let anyone approach this room. If necessary, move Mr. Evans to a special treatment room. Outside, the city lights of New York flickered in the dark night. Detective Sullivan looked out, feeling the growing threat. He knew that Finch had started to move to silence the witness. Detective Sullivan whispered to himself, "This fight is getting more dangerous. But now I hold the key. And I won't stop until it's all over." The private hospital where Leo Evans was admitted had turned into a small fortress. Police officers guarded every corner of the hallways, surveillance cameras were rechecked, and access was restricted to medical staff only. However, Detective Sullivan knew that if Finch really intended to silence the witness, he wouldn't stop at just trying to sneak in. That morning, a new report arrived on Detective Sullivan's desk. An anonymous informant had sent a short message. "Finch has prepared the next step. There is a plan to attack outside the hospital. Be careful." Detective Sullivan gripped his phone tightly. "They're starting to get nervous," he muttered. In the hospital room, Leo looked more stable. His face was still pale, but his voice was clearer. "Detective, don't just protect me. Release all of this to the public. People need to know the truth." Detective Sullivan shook his head. "Not yet. If we rush, their network could escape. We need to secure enough evidence to prosecute Finch and all his accomplices." Meanwhile, the forensics team discovered a shocking clue on the USB drive, minutes of a meeting codenamed Orchid Meeting. The meeting was scheduled for 3 days later at a luxury hotel in Midtown Manhattan. The names of several local officials and corporate executives were on the attendance list. Everyone on the list was connected to suspicious insurance policies. Detective Sullivan realized this could be a golden opportunity. If he could infiltrate that meeting, he might get direct evidence of Finch's role. But the risk was extremely high. If his identity was exposed, his life could be in danger. In the afternoon, Detective Sullivan visited the hospital again. He found Leo struggling to write something in a small notebook by his bed. His handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. "There's a mole inside the police. Don't trust everyone." Detective Sullivan read the note and fell silent. "Who are you talking about?" he asked seriously. Leo looked up at the ceiling and then whispered in a weak voice, "I don't know the name. But Finch has connections inside. When you make your move, you must only trust those who are truly close to you." The words made Detective Sullivan even more vigilant. If there was really a traitor within the police force, the raid plan could be leaked at any time. That night, in a small headquarters he used with a few trusted colleagues, Detective Sullivan laid out his strategy. He pointed to a large board filled with photos, notes, and fund flow diagrams. A large red circle was drawn around Arthur Finch's name, with smaller lines connecting him to Jessica, several officials, and the Orchid Meeting records. "The time has come," Detective Sullivan told his small team. "We can't just wait. In 3 days, Finch and his group will gather. We have to be there." A team member asked, "If there's really a mole inside, can we trust police support?" Detective Sullivan looked at them one by one. "No. We can only trust this team. All external information leaks must be restricted. Otherwise, Finch will be gone before we can even move." Outside, the rain began to pour heavily, drenching the streets of New York. The flashes of lightning seemed to accompany the escalating tension. Detective Sullivan stood by the window, looking at the dark night sky. He knew the road ahead would be filled with traps, but at the same time, he realized that the truth was too close to give up now. "Finch," he whispered, "this time, it's your turn to be afraid." The five-star hotel in Midtown Manhattan stood majestically with its dazzling crystal lights. That night, luxury vehicles lined up in front of the entrance. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary business meeting, but Detective Sullivan knew that behind the heavy, gilded wooden doors, a dangerous game was being played. Along with his two most trusted colleagues, Detective Sullivan entered in disguise. He wore a plain suit to pose as a financial consultant invited by one of the attendees. His colleagues acted as support staff, carrying laptops and documents to enhance their credibility. The hallway leading to the hotel ballroom was filled with people with serious faces. Officials, entrepreneurs, and even a few faces Detective Sullivan knew to be involved in corruption cases. Everyone had a friendly smile, but behind it, the smell of fear and ambition was thick. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was very formal. A long table surrounded by black leather chairs was arranged in a circle, and on the large screen at the front, the words, "Orchid Meeting Private Session," were displayed. A few minutes later, Arthur Finch entered. He was wearing a black suit with a red tie, and his stride was full of confidence. All eyes immediately turned to him. He was seen not just as a leader but as someone who held the answers to the future of their network. "Thank you for attending." Finch's voice was loud and full of menace. "Tonight we are not just talking about insurance policies. We are talking about the future and how we can create a system that never fails." Detective Sullivan lowered his head slightly, pretending to take notes, while occasionally glancing at the small screen on his wristwatch. A hidden camera was recording everything. Finch continued his presentation. He showed fund flow diagrams, medical data manipulation strategies, and even international case studies. Everything was explained as if it were a legitimate business, but Detective Sullivan knew it was just another face of a brutal crime. But suddenly, a man sitting near the door stood up. Detective Sullivan recognized his face. It was Commissioner Reynolds, one of the high-ranking police officials who was supposed to remain neutral. Detective Sullivan's blood ran cold. This was the traitor Leo Evans had warned about. Commissioner Reynolds smiled faintly, shook Finch's hand, and then sat in an empty seat next to him. "Don't worry." His voice was low but clear. "Our information is safe. No one can break through this circle." Detective Sullivan tried to suppress his expression. His heart was pounding violently. If Commissioner Reynolds was really on Finch's side, any official police operation could be leaked at any time. Finch raised his wine glass. "To our future," he said. All the attendees raised their glasses, and a round of applause erupted. Just then, one of Detective Sullivan's colleagues, sitting in a corner, sent a message through a small communication device. "Signal secure, everything recorded can exit now." But Detective Sullivan knew that getting out would not be easy. As soon as Finch finished speaking, the ballroom doors were locked from the inside. Two large men stood guard at the door. Clearly, they didn't want any guests leaving before the event was over. The atmosphere became even more tense when Finch suddenly turned his gaze toward Detective Sullivan. "You, the new guy, which company are you from?" he asked in a suspicious tone. The room suddenly fell silent, and all eyes were on Detective Sullivan. He calmly stood up and smiled slightly. "I'm just a small person, Chairman. I came to learn. I'm very interested in the system you've built." Finch stared at him for a few seconds, as if trying to see through his mask. Then he slowly chuckled. "Good. We need more young people who are eager to learn." The laughter eased the tension, but Detective Sullivan knew he had just passed a dangerous test. The miniature camera inside his shirt continued to record every conversation. He just had to hold on until the event was over and find a way to get out with the evidence. But at the same time, he knew that a single small mistake could mean he wouldn't leave that hotel alive. The air inside the ballroom grew increasingly stuffy. The air conditioning was no longer felt, or perhaps it was just Detective Sullivan's feeling, burdened with tension. He knew that every moment was crucial and that the longer he stayed inside, the greater the risk of his cover being blown. Finch was still talking at length about their new investment strategies, but to Detective Sullivan, every word was just a mask to cover up a crime. The miniature camera attached to his suit clearly recorded the list of names, the fund flow diagrams, and even Commissioner Reynolds's remarks guaranteeing protection from within the police force. A security guard approached and placed a hand on Detective Sullivan's shoulder. "Sir, please come to the back. The chairman wants to talk to you more closely." Detective Sullivan's heart almost stopped. He glanced at his two colleagues in the corner of the room. One was busy pretending to open a laptop, while the other gave a small nod, signaling, "Stay calm, we're ready." Detective Sullivan was led to a small room behind the ballroom. When the door closed, the sound of music from the main hall faded. Finch sat with his legs crossed in a chair, while Commissioner Reynolds stood beside him, hands in his pockets, watching with suspicious eyes. "What's your name?" Finch's voice was calm but sharp. Detective Sullivan sighed and answered with the fake identity he had prepared. "I'm Kevin Kim, a financial consultant who just moved to New York. I was invited by Mr. Peterson." Finch narrowed his eyes. "Peterson. He likes to bring in new people. But I don't like surprises." The tension oppressed the air. Commissioner Reynolds leaned over and whispered in Finch's ear, "This guy is strange. He could be a cop." Detective Sullivan struggled to keep his facial expression neutral. After years on the job, he was used to moments like this, but this time, the stakes were higher. If discovered, he could lose not just his cover but his life. Finch got up and slowly walked around Detective Sullivan's chair. "If you're really a consultant, explain what you think of this business model. What would you do if you became part of our organization?" Detective Sullivan swallowed and spoke calmly. "I would focus on the record-keeping system. Your system is excellent, Chairman, but it needs an extra layer to ensure the funds are not traceable. If I create a new structure through shell companies, no one will suspect anything." For a moment, the room was quiet. Finch stopped walking and stared at Detective Sullivan with a sharp gaze. Then, he suddenly smiled. "You're smart." The tension on Detective Sullivan's shoulders eased slightly. But before he could breathe a sigh of relief, a small gunshot was heard from outside the ballroom. Everyone in the room reflexively turned their heads. Finch shouted at his subordinate, "What's going on?" The walkie-talkie in one of the guard's pockets crackled. "Chairman, it's outside. The police have surrounded the hotel." Finch slammed his fist on the table. "Damn it, who leaked the information?" Commissioner Reynolds looked at Finch with a stern face. "I wasn't informed. But this could be a trap." Detective Sullivan knew this was his chance. He slowly stood up and looked at Finch. "It seems an insider leaked it, Chairman." Finch quickly turned his head. "What do you mean?" "Who?" But before an answer could come, the door was forced open. A fully armed SWAT team stormed in, their flashlight beams blinding. "Police! Don't move!" Chaos erupted. The Orchid meeting attendees fled, some trying to destroy laptops and documents. Finch grabbed Commissioner Reynolds and tried to escape through a secret door on the side. Detective Sullivan chased after them, but two guards stopped him. He had to fight them off fiercely, almost losing the hidden camera that had recorded all the evidence. Meanwhile, Finch managed to escape with Commissioner Reynolds through an emergency staircase. In the commotion, Detective Sullivan broke free from the guard's grasp. He was out of breath, his forehead drenched in sweat. He looked at the dark hallway where Finch had disappeared and whispered softly, "This fight isn't over. I'll hunt you down, no matter how long it takes." Morning enveloped New York with a hazy gray sky. The streets were still wet from last night's rain. In his small headquarters, Detective Sullivan sat in deep thought in front of a large board filled with photos, notes, and fund flow diagrams. All the evidence secured from the Orchid meeting was safe: the video recording, the confiscated documents, and the testimonies of some of the arrested attendees. But the most important thing was that Finch and Commissioner Reynolds were still on the run. Leo Evans, who had just begun to recover, came with the help of a nurse. He saw Detective Sullivan and smiled faintly. You're much closer to the truth now. But remember, this road is not over yet. Detective Sullivan nodded. I know. But at least now we have strong enough evidence. This network can no longer hide. A few hours later, a press conference was held at the NYPD headquarters. The media packed the conference room, and television cameras were pointed at the podium. Detective Sullivan stood with the police commissioner and announced the facts: a dark insurance syndicate led by Arthur Finch, supported by corrupt officials like Commissioner Reynolds. The public was in shock. The news spread rapidly through social media, and people were both angry and relieved. Angry that they had been deceived for so long, and relieved that someone had finally been brave enough to expose it. But amidst the cheers, Detective Sullivan's heart was still heavy. He knew that Finch would not stay quiet. The man was cunning and always had a way out. On the television screen, Finch's face appeared as the most wanted fugitive, but to Detective Sullivan, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. That night, Detective Sullivan stood on a bridge over the East River. A cold wind blew, and the city lights flickered in the distance. He looked at the river flowing by, washing away all secrets and sins. Honesty and justice are sometimes slower than deceit, he muttered. But in the end, those who do wrong must pay the price. His phone rang. On the other end, Leo Evans's voice was weak but firm. Thank you, Detective. If it weren't for you, I would have been gone by now. Keep going. Don't stop until they are completely dismantled. Detective Sullivan smiled faintly. I promise. No matter how far they hide, I will find them. He hung up the phone and walked away, letting his shadow melt into the darkness of the night. Somewhere out there, Finch might still be free, and Commissioner Reynolds might still have his network. But one thing was certain: the truth had begun to come out, and once that door was opened, no one could close it again. Dear friends, after we have followed the long story of Leo, Jessica, Arthur, and Detective Sullivan, many of us must have felt our hearts stirred. This is not just because of the tension from the conspiracy, but because of the powerful moral message embedded in the story. Let's sit for a moment, take a deep breath, and reflect on what lessons we can actually learn. First, we are reminded that greed is the root of many crimes. Arthur Finch and his gang were not poor or uneducated people. They had status, connections, and even power. But a heart filled with excessive ambition blinded their eyes. They did not hesitate to sacrifice others for wealth that they could not take with them when they died anyway. Here we learn that we must never let greed rule our hearts. When we endlessly crave material things, we will easily fall into the wrong path. Second, we learn about trust and betrayal. Deputy Chief Miller trusted his wife but was ultimately betrayed. Detective Sullivan believed that all his police colleagues were on the same side, but there was a traitor within. Life is full of uncertainty, and even the closest person can stab you in the back. So we learn to always be careful in giving our trust. This does not mean we have to suspect everyone, but that we must be wise in judging who is truly trustworthy and who is just a hypocrite. Third, this story shows the importance of a steadfast heart and courage. If Detective Sullivan had given up midway, if he had been afraid to confront Finch, if he had backed down when he knew there was a traitor within the police, the truth would never have been revealed. Here we learn that courage is not about not feeling fear, but about continuing to move forward despite fear. We may not face an insurance mafia like in the story, but every day we face life's challenges, such as a tough job, a difficult economy, or even family problems. The courage to keep holding on, that is what makes us true winners. Fourth, we are reminded of the price of inner freedom. Jessica claimed she did everything for freedom, to escape the shackles of her household. But in the end, the freedom she sought in the wrong way only gave birth to a new prison, a prison of guilt, a prison of the law, and even a real prison. Here we can learn that if we feel pressured in life, we must find the right way out. Talk to your spouse, seek advice from your parents, or draw closer to God. Do not let the desire for freedom lead us to ruin. Fifth, this story also awakens our awareness of the importance of law and justice. We may have seen in the news how some cases just seem to disappear, or how the rich or officials can buy their freedom with money. But this story gives hope. As long as there are people like Detective Sullivan, as long as there are investigators, judges, journalists, and even ordinary citizens who bravely speak up, justice will not die. Justice may move slowly, but it will always find its way. Sixth, we learn about family and true love. Deputy Chief Miller became a victim because he truly loved his wife. But his love was not reciprocated sincerely. Don't many of us often forget to appreciate our spouses, parents, or children? Sometimes we are so busy with work, so busy chasing our dreams, that we forget that family is our most precious asset. So let us make this story a reminder not to lose the people around us before we realize how precious they are. Seventh, this story also carries a message about the power of prayer and hope. When Leo Evans was on the verge of death, he still had time to leave a message for Detective Sullivan. His small hope that the truth would be revealed became a flame that continued to burn in the investigator's heart. We are the same. Life does not always go as expected, but never stop praying and hoping. Hope is the fuel that allows us to weather the storm. Brothers and sisters, living in an era like today, we are often tempted by instant things, quick money, power, or momentary pleasure. But believe me, all of this means nothing if obtained in the wrong way. On the contrary, living modestly with a peaceful heart is much happier. Let's cultivate 3 things within ourselves. First, honesty. Because with honesty, we can sleep at night without fear. Second, loyalty. Because without loyalty, love and friendship are just a play. Third, courage. Because with courage, we can face whatever comes our way. I urge all viewers who have faithfully listened to this story, reflect on whether there is any part of our lives that has started to stray, whether there is a small greed that is unknowingly growing in our hearts. If so, stop it immediately. Do not let it become a fire that burns everything we love. And finally, let's make this story a warning and an opportunity to strengthen our faith. The world is full of deceit, but we must not be swept away by its current. Hold fast to the family values, traditions, and teachings that our parents have passed down. In the end, what makes us happy is not wealth or status, but a clean heart and a meaningful life.